I'm back during the summer of 2011. A few friends and I decided to organize a little camping trip to a forest just a few miles outside our hometown. Delamere Forest, despite being pretty small, presented us with a much-needed opportunity to connect with nature. City living can be good, but it can be stifling, so any chance to get out into the countryside was well received. But as time went by, and the date of the camping trip approached, things began to unravel. One by one, various friends called and texted to inform us that they wouldn't be attending, be it family illness, lack of cash, or just laziness. In the end, there was only two of us that actually decided to go. So early on a sunny summer morning, we boarded a train for the journey down to the forest. The weather was perfect, a cloudless sky with a light breeze that made the hike through the woods not nearly as oppressive as we were expecting. It didn't take long for us to find a decent spot in the shade that happened to be right next to a stream we could use for washing and drinking water. The only trouble was the spot was very open, visible to passerbys, and not the least bit subtle. So it's late afternoon. We're tired from our hike and we decided to build a fire to cook some dinner on. But here's the thing. Building a small fire is an essential part of camping. Sure, but it attracts people. The smell of burning wood in the cooking food, the smoke. Sometimes you might as well be announcing yourself to the whole forest with a megaphone or something. But we know this, so we're not exactly surprised when a group of locals stumbles across our little camp and comes down to say hello. They seemed friendly enough at first, and this might sound paranoid, but the whole time I just had this bad feeling about them. It fascinates me how human instinct can pick up things like that. Little clues and body language or speech that leads us to believe that someone isn't being entirely genuine. I wasn't sure if it was the way the locals were looking at each other or the strange probing questions they asked. But I knew they didn't have the best of intentions. When they moved on, and were out of earshot, my friend suggested we move the camera. Now he's normally the skittish one who I'm perennially telling to calm down or chill out. But on this occasion, I knew he was right. Maybe we were being a little bit paranoid, but in instances such as that, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So as tired and half-drunk as we were, we packed up our stuff, doused the fire, and then started looking for another place to set up camp. Luckily, we found somewhere pretty quick, a heavily wooded hill that basically overlooked our old campsite on one side. Not that we had a direct view of that. But if you walked a minute or so away from camp, we had a pretty good view of the surrounding area. At least we did during the daytime. And as the sun set, we started another fire, cooked ourselves up some ramen noodles and our mess tins, then proceeded to drink and smoke ourselves stupid. We talked nonsense around the fire until we were too tired and drunk to continue, then retired to our poncho shelters for the night. I'm pretty sure I passed out as soon as I got into my sleeping bag, as I don't remember drifting off or anything. I just know that the next thing I can recall is opening my eyes in pitch darkness, to the sound of a distant car revving its engine. At first, I was just annoyed to be woken up. The hangover was kicking in hard and I felt like boiled feces as I tried to fall back asleep. But the distant vehicle kept revving its engine, and as the sound grew louder and louder, I knew it was getting closer. Something told me to go and check it out. By the time I started to hear voices, it might have been just a bunch of kids taking a stolen car for a spin. But like I said, sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. But when I go to the edge of the hill, I can already see torch beams all over our old campsite. The revving engine was from a vehicle that had been driven all the way down the forest path to our previous camp. Someone was down there looking for us. I think I acted more out of instinct than anything else, moving as quickly and quietly as I could back to my sleeping friend to wake him up. I must have explained what I'd seen like 2 or 3 times. He was just as exhausted and half-drunk as I was, but when it sank in, he was up on his feet with me and helping to kick dirt on our dining fire. We then grabbed a pair of binoculars we were carrying with us and then ran back to the edge of the hill to watch the scene below. In utter horror, we could see what was in the man's hands, thanks to the torches that they shone on one another: baseball bats, hammers, and the length of rope or just a few of the things they carried. They spat and cursed, furious that they'd come back too late to catch us to do God knows what. All we had were our Swiss Army knives to defend ourselves with. If the guys down there had decided to actually search the area, they had found us pretty easily. And I'm not sure I'd be here typing this today. But to our infinite fortune, they didn't. Maybe they had been drinking themselves, or were just too lazy to actually look for us. But thank God they did it. With one person keeping watch, the other went back to camp to pack their gear as fast as they could. The guys down below were hanging around our old camp, kicking at the fire we'd so carefully constructed, taking all their spite out on the things we'd left behind. As I've mentioned before, they didn't seem keen on actually looking for us, but they didn't seem like they were in a hurry to leave either. This meant we were essentially stuck on this wooded hill, as an escape attempt with our heavy packs meant that if we were discovered, there would be no outrunning any of them, especially since they had a vehicle. We ended up staying there until morning. Neither of us could get any sleep, despite the gang leaving with their vehicle. I remember being terrified they returned with more torches with more of a will to find us. But they didn't. They were probably sleeping off their own hangovers. By the time we were on the train ride home, we were due to stay another 2 nights, and I was still annoyed we'd had to call the trip short. But with those scummy local thugs around, we just didn't want to risk it. Be careful when you're traveling around, whether it is internationally or locally. Because despite the unfathomable kindness of strangers, some of them aren't so friendly. The story takes place up in Scotland a few years back to friends, and I took an overnight coach from Liverpool to Dumfries for a week-long, wild camping trip. The major difference between wild camping and regular camping is the presence of tents. Wild campers don't take tents. They just use ponchos or tarps to make a basic shelter, then basically just sleep on the bare ground. Yeah, it can suck sometimes, but it's a challenge. It burns the fat from our soul, so to speak. So it's like 5 in the morning. We've hardly slept, and we're trying to navigate our way through the Scottish countryside. Naturally, we take a wrong turn. We have 6.5 miles ahead of us. Roughly 9 a virus of walking, and we have taken a wrong turn 2 minutes in. I am in disbelief that we could be that dumb. Even though it's about 5:30 in the morning and we are a strange-looking trio. We stop a passing cyclist to ask directions. He is typically friendly and helpful in pointing us in the right direction. We turn a corner and catch a glimpse of a war memorial that would serve as a navigational checkpoint. A medley of "we cheers" has droned. We cannot help but stop, lay our packs on the benches near the memorial, and take a breather. And the war memorial is at a crossroads. I am reminded of people taking their own lives being buried at crossroads, and this troubles me. We are bathed in warm golden sunlight as we make our way southwest towards Cargenbridge. The pavement is narrow, and we are often forced onto the road to stay level. One a rise to our left, we see our first rabbit. This seems like a good omen. We mime aiming through imaginary scopes, making puffing sounds, and rubbing our bellies at it. It clocks us, and scampers into a hedgerow. We continue walking under heavy packs, past a tacky Fox Stonehouse sign, with 2 plastic-looking swords protruding from it. It says something in Gaelic only in Scotland, one of us pants. We reach Cargenbridge and cross the brae with an old blacksmith dwelling at its foot, working our way up a gentle slope past the local secondary school and reach the foreign track. We have made good time, and there are no farm hands in the fields, just scores of grazing livestock. The farmer's house is exceptionally trim. But the cattle shed and neighboring building are run down, and I suspect home to bats. Sheep and months-old lamb spot us and skiff away skittishly. We navigate past the cattle shed and clamber over 2 fences to avoid a job waste tank. This had inadvertently put us right in front of another kind of fence. The electrified kind is that electric someone whines. I follow the wire with my gaze and see it dig sharply, connecting with the battery unit. I grimace. It is too high to bound over in our packs, make it impossible to crawl under it. I imagine what it feels like to receive an electric shock to my testicles. I spot a large piece of dead wood and surrounded by fresh cow paths, and as if they were landmines, avoid them nervously and drag the dead wood to the fence. It is heavy enough to pin it down. As I step over, I hear it buzzing faintly. We continue across 2 fields, climbing the fence between them. This is not easy with a heavy pack. I take out my iPhone to film the ascent of the first of many hills. We start to breathe heavily as our packs suddenly feel twice as heavy, and we lean forward to maintain momentum. Our steps are strained and small. I put the phone away. At the steepest point, the banter ceases and we heel ourselves up the grassy ascent. I start to feel hungry, and first recce point comes into view. A planned stop to orient and order ourselves. We lay down our packs just a few yards away from where we pitched our tent on the previous trip. And rest our aching legs. My friend Corky takes his shirt off. It is soaked with sweat, and I noticed steam rising from his shoulders. "Jesus, Martin," the other guy exclaims, "there's actual steam coming off of you." We laugh as we take out tobacco and food. Martin and I have the same Scotch oat cakes. We eat them with cheese spread and share Martin's Jetboil coffee. The Jetboil is an incredibly handy little gadget and will almost become the center of our lives for the next week. Corky puts on my dry civilian clothes and eyes up but 10 of all-day breakfast, proceeding to read out some of the ingredients. It is much cooler here in the shade, and we gaze out across the landscape, either picking bits of okay kind of our teeth, or smoking rolled cigarettes. It is already 7 in the morning, yet our sleep deprivation makes it seem later in the day. This is mildly disorienting, yet we estimate arrival at Lahore Bar by around 10. Corky is skeptical of this. The wrong turn was not a satisfying enough speed bump, and he is still expecting one. This feeling is justified. After moving slowly but steadily cross-country along the ridge of the hill, we reach the small collection of houses that serve as a landmark. After some deliberation, we decided to cross a field of cows that has the only traversable fence we can see. We're motivated partly because it seems quick and easy. Partly because of the voids another more vicious-looking electric fence. About halfway across the field, I notice the numerous cows begin to stare at us. This is not usually particularly intimidating, but their number and obviously hostile glares make me slow my step. They're all looking at us. You know? I say they're just curious. Martin says the cows begin walking towards us, spreading out in the line. I'm reminded of almost a battle formation. They're walking towards us now. They just want to have a look at us. Martin says the cows start into a trot and then a cumbersome gallop. Corky stops and starts to walk backwards, do the running at us. I to stop and begin to turn over my shoulder. I see a small enclosure with electrical conductors in it. "Bail dude bail," Corky yells in. We try to run under our packs. This amounts to hobbling. I have already weighed up and have decided death by electricity has to be quicker than trampling. "Don't run." Martin screams instantly, the order fires synapses in my brain. I stop, spin around and throw my arms into the air, making myself appear large. Corky repeats the same motion simultaneously and without regarding me. The charging cows seem to respond instantly. Some stop, the rest slow their pace. I hear an indistinct shouting coming from the other side of the field. It is the farmer bidding us to advance along the fence, to the gate. "See, we're good. Just keep moving." Mart says, reassured. We move slowly and compactly, arms outstretched, as the cows surround us and jostle for a view of us. They are aggressive with each other. Some mount the cows in front of them for a glimpse. This is all okay. I say to myself, this is all gonna be okay. Hey, nice cows. This is completely safe. This isn't really Pero. I want to laugh, but I cannot. I am genuinely terrified. Limb shaking. I climb over the wooden gate as the farmer addresses us. "They're just curious. They're just come up for a wee look. If you're along the edge of the field, you'll do all right. If you've gone across, then he breaks off and looks away. Then night, oh, now could you tell us a good route to maybe house, and just follow this road here? It's usually quiet, then turn right at the main road and follow it. Don't turn off into the farm. Just keep going and you'll find the road to the house. So key. Yeah, cheers, mate. We are delighted for his assistance. He seems mildly interested in us. But he's obviously too annoyed by the commotion to show it. Pretty much every time I told the story since people have laughed. I get that. I can see why a bunch of city kids getting scared by cows is definitely somewhat comedic. But it did scare the life out of us. Especially when we got home from the trip and realized just how much danger we were really in. You see, cows kill more people each year than sharks do. And pretty much the exact way I described. A hiker or country walker decides to cut across a field not around it or using the edge, and they get trampled by cows. In fact, the UK Health and Safety Executive has since reissued long-standing advice to farmers not to put calves and their mothers in fields accessible to the public as a precaution. That is straight up pulled from an article from the British newspaper The Independent. So next time you fancy taking a shortcut through a field, make sure it's not occupied. You could get a nasty, very unexpected surprise. Washington National Forests is the oldest of its kind in the southern United States, nearly 2 million acres of untouched wilderness that make for some of the best hunting trips imaginable. In fact, it is said that Washington is composed of the Choctaw word of Omaha for hunting and shitshow for big together, meaning big hunt far from home. So as you can imagine, during hunting season, you can't move for high-vis jackets and bright orange hunter caps. My buddies and I have never really been into hunting, or about as East Coast as they come. I mean, until we visited Arkansas, I barely even made it past Pennsylvania. So our idea of relaxing in nature does not include butchering of freshly killed animal. So when we discovered that there was a window during high summer, when hunting in the Washington is strictly forbidden, we were absolutely elated. There'd be entire sections of the forest that would be basically deserted. We'd have the place to ourselves, or so we thought. We drove for 8 hours a day for 3 days to make it all the way to Arkansas from our home in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Since 1,500 miles in one sitting was too nauseating to think about. We made a little road trip out of it, stopping in Philly, DC, in the Nashville. Honestly, I think I could move to DC just for the mumbo sauce. I saw it on Anthony Bourdain and just had to try it. Trust me, that does not disappoint. But anyway, by the time we finally made it to Washington National Forests, we were seriously ready to relinquish the trappings of society and embrace the tranquility and purity of nature, which is a fancy pants way of saying we were ready to get blind drunk around a roaring fire and sing Dropkick Murphys songs at the top of our lungs, which we did, maybe with a little too much enthusiasm. As after just 2 out of the 4 nights we were due to camp in the wash, we ran out of beer and tobacco, not exactly at an opportune moment either. It was late in the afternoon when we opened our coolers to discover just 3 untouched cans, just enough to keep us company on what would surely be hours of walking to the nearest liquor store. Outlaw Liquor was a little more than a wooden shack on the outskirts of a small town called Crystal Springs. It took us about 3 hours of solid walking to get there, and I can promise you, it's worth every step. At first, we weren't sure if we were in a liquor store or a hunting lodge. There were taxidermies of black bears, buck, turkeys, and red foxes dotted all over the place. Jeff, the owner, showed us all the locally made wines and spirits, and even gave us samples of a few choice fermentations. We walked in with the intention of grabbing a sick pack or two and left with our backpacks full of beers, some of Jeff's homemade beef jerky, and a few little bottles of homebrew wine, along with a bottle each of what Jeff, the owner, called barrel-aged Abraxas, a locally brewed stout that was 11%. Yep, you read that right, 11%. The sun was beginning to drip below the horizon by the time we were anywhere near our campsite. As aching feet from hours of walking were numbed by the booze we sipped as we walked. I had already cracked open my own little pack of jerky, passing out strips of it as we hoped that it might soak up a little the booze. We were at that point in a drinking session when bladders are getting a little too full. So every so often our journey back to the camp, we'd stop so one of us could take a walk off in the trail to urinate. It was a beautiful evening. Crickets chirped as bats flew around or heads tripping softly as they used their sonar to hone in on flying insects. When it was my turn to call for a pee break, my buddies sat down on the edge of the trail with their beers as I wandered off into the woods to find a decent spot. I found one, did my thing, and then started to turn back, when I heard something to the trees. It sounded like people, hushed voices, and footfalls among the fallen leaves. And my stupid half-boozed state, I thought it might be a good idea to introduce myself. Maybe we could have a few drinks, tell some stories, make some friends. But these people did not want to be friends. As I pushed through a patch of dense brush and into a small woodland clearing, it became clear that wanting to introduce myself was a terrible idea. The moment I emerged, 3 or 4 guys in the clearing, turning to look at me and angry surprise that we're in rough clothing, ragged leather boots and a lot of denim. He had some kind of weapon in their hands, machetes, bowie knives. One of them had this rusted spike club that looked like it could have been 100 years old. Between them, hog-tied and writhing in the dirt, was a young woman, her body a mosaic of bruises and abrasions. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Never in my life had I heard anything so upsetting as the noises she made through her cloth gag. When I finally unglued my eyes from the sight before me, I looked up at one of the hillbilly-looking guys looming over the prostrate girl. He was smiling. And with one smooth motion, he raised a single finger to his lips. Sheesh. I turned and started walking slowly at first. I didn't want those guys to think I was panicking that it was going to call the cops or something. I tried to stay calm. But after a few seconds, I started running, sprinting towards the trail. I didn't need to say a word to my friends. They started sprinting too, as soon as they saw my face. We ran and ran and ran until my buddy puked up beer and half-digested jerky all over himself. But by that point, we were out of danger. No one was following us. When I told them exactly what I'd seen, an argument ensued. One of my friends went to call the cops immediately, while the other insisted we had to get out of the woods as soon as possible. This would mean driving his car well over the limits until we could find a motel. We could not call the cops and risk a DUI. Not in Missouri. We concluded that we'd call the cops first, then get out of there into a hotel before we got pulled over breathalyzer and arrested. We never heard back from the cops. My buddy reported what I'd seen over the phone and as much detail as he could. But I never got closure for what I'd seen that night. I often wonder what happened to that girl, if she ended up getting rescued or if she is living a peaceful, happy life now. But sometimes, in the darkest of moments, I know that girl didn't make it out of the Washita. Even if she was alive, a piece of her would be forever left in that little clearing in the woods taken from her by cruel, wild men. Back in early 2014, a few friends and I had an idea to do something for charity. We discussed shaving our heads, running marathons, organizing some kind of community picnic, but nothing seemed to gain any traction. They were all tired, overused ideas. If we wanted to get donations, we needed to do something big. So when I had the idea of some earning 7 nights sleeping rough after hiking 20 miles into the Brecon Beacon mountain range in Wales, I knew it was crazy enough to get donations, but I didn't think my friends would agree to it. But they did. For some inexplicable reason, they agreed. It was a numbers game. Simple. Tell people 7 nights, 20 miles, homeless for the homeless, and watch the purse string loosen. By the date of departure, we'd collected the grand total of £1,255, just over $1,500 for a shelter, a British charity that helps street sleepers and those facing housing crises. We felt proud beyond words. But in the run-up to the aforementioned day of departure, we were getting pretty anxious. The Brecon Beacons are used by the British Special Air Services, basically our version of Delta Force for their training due to how rugged and wild the terrain can be. We'd also planned the trip for early April, which meant heavy rain and strong winds. This meant that we ended up investing a fair bit of our own money in military surplus equipment. We'd need a lot of gear to keep ourselves safe and warm for 7 whole nights in the beacons. And it so happened that Army surplus gear was the cheapest and most reliable option. So as you can imagine, we were covered in camouflage for the march out in the beacon's huge rucksack stuffed with canned food and water. Weight is down as more miles meant more pain. Pain in the shoulders, pain in the feet, pain in the knees and the neck and the thighs. By mile 17, the 2 other guys who attended had thrown in the towel. I found myself the only dissenting voice as they proposed we call a taxi for the final 3 miles of the journey. One of my friends claimed his pack was ridiculously heavy, and he simply couldn't carry on marching. I wondered just what he brought with him that made his gear so difficult to march with. But when we reached a large freshwater lake and set up camp, I found out why he bought an air rifle, a 22 pellet gun that must have accounted for almost half the weight he was carrying. Yeah, I was a little annoyed. Maybe if he had left it behind, he'd have had it in him to keep going. But boys with toys, right? We had 8 whole days to kill. Target shooting would definitely account for a few hours of fun. Not to mention, if we found ourselves a tasty-looking wood, pigeon, or rabbit, we might be able to treat ourselves to a bit of fresh meat. So after an initial first night of exhaustion, chilling around a fire at the lake's edge, before getting some sleep, we arose at dawn with a big day ahead of us. Somehow we'd gotten into our heads that a dawn hunt would be a good idea. Few people around the wildlife would be active. But it wasn't to be. We didn't get a decent shot on a single animal. But we did run into something. At one point in the absolute middle of nowhere, we break through a tree line and find ourselves face to face with a blurry-eyed early morning dog walker. We couldn't believe it. The chances of running into someone around here was minimal. But there someone was looking nervously at a group of lads wearing camouflage, one of which was carrying an air rifle that looked exactly like an actual firearm. We waved. He smiled. We all moved on. We didn't think anything of it. To be honest, he didn't seem like the type to call the police or make a big deal out of it. I mean, he didn't ask questions. He didn't even mention the rifle. So by the time we made it back to our camp in time for lunch, incidentally had been pretty much forgotten. After an afternoon of gathering firewood and other camp crafts, we settled in for an evening of fireside storytelling. I cracked out a few choice ghost stories, some of which got more laughs and spooks. While we're down to a few beers before heading to sleep. A few hours later, I'm jolted awake by something. The large shelter we'd made for the 3 of us from a huge tarp should have been pitch black, but I could see rays of light penetrating from torch beams outside. Then I heard it on police: come up with your hands raised right now. One by one we exited the shelter just as they ordered us to. My hands were shaking horribly as I pushed them out of the entrance and into the blinding light of 5 or 6 torches. I remember the pure gut-wrenching fears. I realized the beams of light weren't in the police's hands. They were attached to the end of whatever weapons they were carrying. I only noticed in the flash, but the realization hit me right between the eyes. I'm honestly amazed I didn't wet myself right then and there on the ground. Now, get on the bloody ground. I hit the dirt hands in the back of my head as my 2 friends followed. Soon all 3 of us were lying face down on the cold wet forest floor as the armed police searched our shelter. It didn't take them long to find the air rifle. Got a bus? One of them called out. I couldn't see any of this, but it was obvious, based on what they were saying. Is that it? That's your lot. Yeah, just a pellet gun by the looks of it. Wait, so you 3 aren't Pathfinders or something? It took a minute before we found the boss to speak up. No. Military at all? No. No. 3 of us said at once. Oh, well. All right, then. The police officer in charge took a few guys back down the trail. Little Erwin had a little hoe. From what I could figure out, the DOD walker, who had seen us had mistakenly thought that we were British Army, lost the maneuvers and had decided to inform the authorities. I don't know if this is standard procedure for civilians in the area. I mean, they must be used to the presence of our men in the beacons. But sometimes, I think he may have thought we were going AWOL or something, and made the decision to call it in. There are a lot of ex-officers living in the beacons. Maybe he was one of them. But I digress. The armed police had us get up off the ground before they questioned us as to why we were there. We were honest to a fault. Told them there was a charity thing, homeless for the homeless or whatever maximum we'd adopted for the fundraising. Aside from the air rifle, they actually seemed pretty impressed. I figured they'd be annoyed at the false alarm, but in reality an armed policeman getting the call means overtime pay, and hunting idiots in the woods with real guns, not crappy pellet guns. This wasn't some inconvenience for them. They live for this stuff. It was surreal. But they left, having only confiscated the air rifle. They left us our knives and fishing gear. Even though we admitted to not having a fishing permit for any of the local lakes. They talked about smelling something funny in the air, but still didn't search our tent for anything. Even though I know that they found a lot we didn't want them to. They also verbally assured us that we'd not be charged with anything. Just don't do it again, boys. Yeah. Was all they had to say on the subject. We actually went back to collect the air rifle too. In the back of my mind, I was sure they'd go back on their word and arrest us at the police station. There are some serious armed trespass laws in the UK, and to this day, I have literally zero clue as to why they didn't charge us with anything. I'd like to think that they were impressed with the whole charity thing, that they decided to come down lightly on us. But in reality, I think we just got lucky. After all, I still think we're extremely lucky that our pellet gun wasn't the only thing they'd taken from us that night. One wrong move. I might not even be here to take this.